Good morning. So, quick recap and reflections as presenter of our Dark Age of Man Chronicles. We were able to complete our 4-session commitment. We committed to a 4-session Chronicles, Dark Age of Man with Sam as Brother Ethelwald, Dell as Vidar Watt, and Sylvester Bryan as Sylvester. Deuce did it. I never get that right, but you can look it up. It means oh God, the meaning is God made or God, something like that. Anyway, fantastic. Again, so the Chronicles, like any Chronicles, it's generally Chronicles are not necessarily a shared timeline of events. Chronicle can be a story about a group, or a hero, and they can be somewhat out of chronological order, right? It can be just a story but they become chronicles as you put them all together. So again, this was not as all pre-game, pre-session setup in our game is very simple. We know the world, Dredgewater, from the book. We know the key NPCs of the town. They're not defined as good or evil. They're not defined as what roles they're going to play. The players make characters. They place them in that county, in Dredge in some way. Depending on their prestige, they're going to be lords, or they're going to be high-ranking church members, or they're going to be peasants, right? If they choose to put lots of points in prestige, they would effectively be a lord, or effectively be a landed person, right? Not necessarily a king or anything like that. But so it really allows the players to to decide how their character starts in the sessions, right? Campaigns or chronicles. Again, we called them chronicles for a couple of reasons. One, this was going to be about these 3 heroes, and it was going to be a particular period in the Dredgewater history. There would be a particular, and of course it was going to be, again, to make sure everybody could make it. And I wanted to set up something that everybody knew the limits on, that we only had to commit to 4. I didn't want people to feel like this was just going to go on and on and on, and I didn't want to feel like they were committing to something they're going to do for a year. I wanted this to be 4-session, and for a number of reasons. One, we just were busy people, and you don't know if everybody's going to enjoy the experience. So you want to make it something that can be completed and everybody can get enough of it that they understand how the process works. They can experience what it's like to play this style of character development. They can I, as a presenter, of course, know how the feeling feels. But I learned some things. This was actually better for me than all the playtesting we've done and all the playtesting I've done, even locally, as because it's a chronicle and because of the nature of a couple of things. It shows the system is completely and utterly versatile. The system is completely and utterly player friendly, and certainly presenter friendly, because everything that they are attempting to do, if it's a challenge and they make that successful roll, it's directly going to impact the level of the world, right? Which we know happens in general, right? But we actually have a mechanical device that actually should, in a way, affect the world around them as they pursue, their actions, right? If I'm making sense, I don't know. Okay, so anyway, the gist was, I didn't know if from one session to the other we would advance 2 months, or we would fast forward time a year, or I didn't know. And because of the nature of our setup, we have 1-page setup, right? We already know we're in Dredgewater. The setup can be something simple, like I set it up. It's famine. It's winter. There's a famine on. And then, of course, from that, I feel I have a major and minor dilemma, which I keep hidden from them. Then we have the inciting incident, which should be whatever's occurred that's kind of got the session going, like maybe a Viking raid. They've just survived a Viking raid, or maybe a Viking raid is imminent, as they've got, whatever your inciting incident is when the players are on the ground for a session, and then they set themselves in fiction, and then they're free to kind of tackle the challenges or pursue their interest, right? Well, the Chronicles, of course, mean that this is quite literally a moment in the history of Dredge that featured these three people and their surrounding NPCs. But I wasn't sure, again, if we would jump forward in time once they resolved an issue, right, etc. But it turned out it was so intense in such short 2-hour windows, so much would occur that created this tension that we needed to basically make these 4 sessions. Almost think about it. This entire Chronicles occurred in a week, basically, or I should say in 3 weeks, right? Because there was a 2-week window there that I fast forwarded to time as they investigated and prepared to, as Washburn's declared war on his enemies. But when you think about the actual 4 sessions, we experienced about 4 days in their lives. This was like 4 days of actual playtime, but it occurred in about a 21-day total time frame, which is, when you think about it, very cool, very remarkable. And this would have been a legitimate Chronicles. The Chronicles of Ethelwald, Sylvester, the family Deusdedit, and Vidar Watt, who became the man-at-arms for the new young Westworld, which we don't know any of this. We have no clue what's going to happen. And then once I start rolling variables and throwing those at the characters, that confounds them, or they prioritize, or they're pursuing their own interests, and these things can make those pursuits more difficult for them or easier for them. It works. It works 100% the way we perceived it, the way we've played it, the way we have defined it. And yes, the rule book leaves much to the presenter and the players to figure out for themselves. And there's the reason for that, right? The more we put in as rules, the more players and GMs and potential customers, potential players will take literally. It'll become a literal argument between players and GMs. So you need to provide the base work for this concept, and you need to provide rules that guide the presenter and the players. But you don't want to over define it to teach it, right? And that's the problem. So what is interesting about rule books? Because if you think about it, rule books are just textbooks. They're teaching us, they're technical writing manuals, how you're going to do this thing. The more you put in, the easier it is for everybody to understand exactly how it works. But then they become literal interpretations that therefore restrict play. So yeah, it's a fine line between how much technical information and exactness do we want to tell must be done this way, or how much do you want to say this is how the system works, figure it out, go for it. You can't break it, right? You just can't, right? And I think we've done that. And but it's easy for me to say, as the guy who with Dell, we kind of figured this out, we kind of created this thing, we kind of worked on it. So again, it's easy for me to say, since it's my baby, right? So would it be as easy for someone else? And still hoping that we're going to get someone in the community willing to run and present the game through a series of sessions. I mean, I would really like to see somebody else, not Dell, not myself, that would run for us a series of sessions so they can get the feeling of how this works as a GM and a presenter, and they can then give us feedback as to whether it was again, we've had Kevin run a session that was fantastic. His feedback was good, and that was early in playtesting. That was our first version of the game, and Kevin did a brilliant job. And that is a session I will never forget. One session running this style, and Kevin, it was unbelievable. And I thought, and Kevin pretty much shared that he thought it worked fine. It worked. It was great. It was easy, and it proved that the concept worked there. But that was before we had rule book written. That started to structure certain things to make it easier for the presenter to understand how to be naive, right? And then Brian ran a session that was amazing, and I'll never forget. And again, Brian's feedback was pretty much, dude, it works. There's nothing complicated here. But again, that was before we came up with our session, major minor dilemmas and things like that. So anyway, and of course, we've not run a campaign where there's been continuity that's been required by the presenter. That continuity then becomes more complicated as they have to then take into account that continuity, put it into the random seed generator that's contextual. That's something else Dell has not experienced, even in playtesting. I have, as I've run a couple of sessions in a row for locals, that I think I've run 3 or 4 sessions total for the locals in playtesting, in which we carried information forward to make sure it worked. I ran 3 or 4 sessions for Dell with 2061, in which I had to carry information forward onto those random seed charts. At the time, I had not perfected how big I wanted the charts. I had used dice 6 tables. I'd used 2 dice 6 tables, and then I came up with the 3 dice 6 to give me more information that could weight the danger on the ends and less dangerous in the middle. So all those playtesting helped us kind of devise the best way with the most data, the easiest prep. So that's been the process of that. The other thing was then, of course, the rulebook really helping players define their character based on the attributes and how you build the character, defining repute, making sure they understand how they can earn repute, and also provide a rule, a literal rule that will at least advise the presenter on how the group can earn repute as a whole if they don't do something miraculous, so to speak. And again, miraculous implies, and this is the other reason you got to be careful, we don't want players trying constantly to do something miraculous. I mean, it's not realistic. Something, some event has to occur that's wow, and they would score a repute. But you don't want players playing to try to create that, because that skews the reality of the world. So knowing they can earn repute by just dealing with a major or minor dilemma, even if they're not exactly certain what that is, they perceive it from the information shown to them in session. There's a famine on, hint, hint, right? If they find a way to deal with that famine, they're going to earn a repute, right? But they don't have to. They can completely ignore the famine and pursue their own ends, and who knows where things go. But the Chronicles, for me, again, as we played the first session and everybody agreed, no, this was too intense, we need to go like a day later and stay in this window. And it turned out to be perfect, because this was a very intense moment. The Chronicles, a bleak winter. This was a moment in the winter where we were at the peak of the pagan Christian hostilities. We were at a peak of the failure of Lord Washburn. We were at the peak of the divide between Falcone's version of the church in Dredgewater and the introduction of Brother Ethelwald's version of the church from London. Vidar was in a personal crossroads as his family is lost to the flood and the famine, his wife and his child. And then Sylvester, who's just trying to do his duty for Lord Washburn in dealing with this. And again, the setup, that's just the way it all came out. And then the process of seeing how Sylvester had to negotiate his personal beliefs with what he was seeing, but also stay loyal to his lord, his liege, his family. Vidar having to figure out his value and where he's supposed to trust and believe in people and in this God, this one God, this so-called Christian God. And then Ethelwald basically wrestling with, these are Christians, I'm a Christian, I'm here to convert pagans, but the way these Christians are persecuting and killing and criminalizing the pagans is something that is not, my version of Christianity, says Brother Ethelwald, so to speak. And Ethelwald's got to wrestle with, am I even about this? I mean, maybe these pagans aren't the bad guy here. Maybe they're, and it becomes a very interesting, in a way, religious crisis to some degree for Brother Ethelwald. However, he knows, and he never wavers actually in what he believes, and therefore he calls upon his God, and he actually never misses a moment in the series of sessions to actually bring forth or call upon his beliefs in every conversation or every moment in which he can affect the world, which is how I think he lived what he believed, right? Despite what he witnessed on the outside, despite the cruelty of the Christians, despite the pogroms issued against the pagans, he stuck to his guns as to what he was and what he believed. And of course, it affects all of who they are, begin to affect the roles of the NPCs. What they say or do and the challenges they roll can direct a direction shift in the motivations of NPCs. I present the young Wesweld as a young lord, heir apparent, obviously naive, somewhat young, immature, and could go either way, could literally follow in his mother's footsteps and become the wrath of God upon the pagans and a zealot murdering and destroying pagans, waging war, or Brian's choices and his effective roles could shift Wesweld's character, his motivation, and it happened organically, alive, in session. I have no interest as a night narrator. I don't know who. I only know Wesweld is this thing, but I have no clue what his motivations are. I don't know what Wesweld's about. I don't know where is Wesweld. I haven't predefined any of that. Wesweld is this tabula rasa. He is only the heir apparent young lord. I don't know yet. Haven't made up my mind. That's not my job. My job is to present what he would be to Brian in the world. He is his lord. He is his future lord. He is royalty to Brian's character. He is at the top of the rung versus, but how Brian says or directs actions or insinuates motivations could direct Wesweld to be a different person. And it happened organically, naturally, and it was amazing. So Brian could have manipulated Wesweld a different way, or he could have felt that manipulation. His speech was not guaranteed to change Wesweld. It only affected the difficulty in which Wesweld would choose to do a certain thing versus become a certain thing. This occurred with Father Falcone, with Brother Ethelwold. Was Falcone actually going to become this dark, kind of disturbed, evil, ambitious father, or was he going to be an ally to Ethelwold? That occurs in the first scenes, in the first session. I don't know who Father Falcone is. I only know his role in the world. I only know Father Falcone is the leader of the church in Dredgewater. I haven't decided who Father Falcone is. How the players interact with him, or how things develop, might tell me, for conflict, Father Falcone should be this guy, or Father Falcone may just be an NPC that's useful to Ethelwold. So we don't know, right? We don't know. I literally don't know how these things are going to transpire. And then Father Falcone becomes Ethelwold's enemy and challenges Ethelwold at every opportunity in session, chastising him in public, calling him a false prophet, challenging him to do something about it. And Ethelwold successfully not only taking action, but then succeeding at a difficulty dice check to actually turn the crowd against Father Falcone. And that, of course, motivates Falcone to go into the palisade and to whisper into the ears. So that failed turning of the mob against Ethelwold, as Ethelwold turned the mob against Falcone, that made Falcone go to the next step. Had he lost that, Falcone would have stayed among the people and continued to keep Ethelwold suppressed as a false prophet, a false miracle maker. He might not have been motivated to enter the palisade and go directly to the lady and the Lord, right? Again, I don't know. We don't know. It's completely naive. And their actions direct where I may go or whatever. And then, of course, we're rolling random seeds. So session 4 begins with them the next morning after they have their powwow in Sylvester's family home. I think I've talked about all that in another recap. I rolled the first thing I rolled, and before every session, once we kind of set the tone, I make that first roll, and I knew immediately. I rolled a 15. I knew, oh, there's going to be something. I looked. Ogre. Ogre's been on the list all 4 sessions. So Ogre has been, but it's moved. So the difficulty of Ogre in the first session was 3. It was at the most extreme. As the session became, as the chronicles in the world became more complicated and the variables more demanding, Ogre actually shifted down in difficulty. The Ogre, very difficult, but as things entered and repopulated the random seed generator over the course of the 4 sessions, Ogre actually got more to the center. And Ogre is still a 15 on out of 3 die 8, 3 die 6, 3 to 18 range. Ogre was still a 15. And I moved it from the 3 to the 18, and then he slowly slid into the 15 spot as other more dangerous things were viable in the world. So Ogre ends up being the first roll. Brian tells the tale of what he does in the morning. He gets up, he goes and takes care of the dogs in the pen. He's doing the rounds. He's stoking the fire. He's got the oats on. And I said, this is the perfect time to drop the Ogre on their heads. It comes wandering out of the east woods, smelling this pen of 8 wolfhounds, and attacks. And they, in a matter of seconds, as a very organized group of all of them. We're talking about the NPCs, Dar and John and Jules and Brian and his dogs, Ethelwald with another smiting miracle with his prayer to God, and with Vidar turning his anger and his wrath onto this giant monster, this abomination of man. They bring it down. They sunder this thing in seconds. In world time, seconds. Game time, it was about 3 or 4 rounds, 5 rounds, 6 rounds. Dar had called him out to start the session, called Vidar out and to draw the square and a duel to the death or to surrender, as Vidar had insulted his honor the day before. So the minute Vidar came out, Dar, the 6'8" former Viking and blacksmith of Dredgewater, drew the square and challenged him to a duel. And they had just started this combat when the ogre showed up, and they all turned their attention on bringing down this monster. From there, they agreed to, his father, Sylvester, Brian's father, after seeing this giant beast show up, he says, get this camp, get these people off my land. I want peace. So Brian orders everybody to pack up and head back to Dredgewater. They all do. They dismember and remove this giant carcass from his land, bury it. And Vidar and Ethelwald lead the entourage of pagans and former and I should say sympathetic Christians back to Dredgewater, while Brian takes his 2 soldiers, leaves his dogs with his father, and heads west to investigate rumors of a very important person, a VIP that he heard from Vidar in last session. Again, this was rolled on a random seed, Justicar. And I had pre-session, I knew that this now had occurred, Justicar had occurred. Last session, I had not quite figured out what is the Justicar. They were headed to it, but had not embraced it. So I had some time, obviously, a month or so before this session to kind of say, well, there's a good chance that Brian's still going to go investigate this VIP, this Justicar. So I went ahead and kind of defined him. So I cheated a little bit, and in my pre-session single page, I defined the Justicar as the major NPC for this upcoming session, thinking Brian or someone might investigate this Justicar. I would not have probably brought the Justicar into this session, as we had so much other stuff going on, plus the random seeds. Since the Justicar had already been rolled on the session 3 chart, he comes off the chart. He is now in play, but he's not yet been encountered. Okay, but I couldn't put the Justicar back on the random seed list because I didn't want to activate the same thing twice. So the Justicar becomes an NPC, and I fleshed out that NPC by defining where he was from and what his motives were as far as why he's here. But I had no idea whether Brian was actually going to visit him, therefore activating him for this Chronicles. Brian heads over. They head back to Dredgewater. At Dredgewater, they counsel the young Wesweld. Wesweld confides in Ethelwald that he really needs guidance. He needs advisors. Where is Sylvester? Where is John? I need someone to guide me. Ethelwald says, I can't give you advice, but I can tell you that God's on your side, and I can't. So he gives him spiritual consultation, which boosts him, which ultimately is, again, it is affecting his potential meeting with the Alderman Daedrin's pagan army, which is he's about to meet at noon. So Daedrin has a difficulty value for this upcoming negotiation. The danger Daedrin is to the Washburns and to Wesweld and to the future of Dredge County is the imminent problem, and he has a difficulty value. And as Ethelwald counsels Wesweld, I don't give Wesweld bonuses because I'm not going to be rolling for him. I lower the Daedrin meeting difficulty. As Vidar says things that could ultimately help or empower Wesweld, that might affect the difficulty value up or down. You know, if Vidar had made some remark that, dude, we're going to get decimated, but look at that, I don't know what we should do, I might have had him make a luck roll that would have actually increased the difficulty value of Daedrin, right? But Vidar, for the most part, was pretty neutral, and the things he did and said never really called. I don't think it called upon a roll to actually affect the boy, Weswell. And this is ongoing. So they're playing their characters describing their actions of what first person or third doesn't matter. But what everything they say and do could trigger a necessary challenge in which it can affect the difficulty value of the scene or the scenario or the individual or the army or the battle or the combat. So you can put that difficulty on the whole nature of the macro event or drill into a micro hand-to-hand combat event. But everything they're doing should, if there's a challenge and it's a natural event that would affect the quality of let's say Wesweld becoming emboldened to become the Lord he is meant to be and handle this older, wiser alderman with his army, right? That the difficulty value can dip 1 or 2 or whatever. So everything they do conceivably is going to affect the next major event if we know one's coming. And we knew a meeting with the alderman and his army was imminent. We knew at noon this was going to happen. So I knew there was a difficulty value that was going to happen. That doesn't mean they would have had it. Something else could have happened. I could have rolled Ogre that attacks Dredgewater, and the whole session's about them dealing with this beast rampaging through. I mean, you don't know where the session's going, but you should keep in mind. So as I was telling the guys in Discord this morning, what's definitely more interesting, what's definitely interesting to me as presenter in this experience is it is more mechanical in the fact that I am tracking DVs for everything. So when Ethelwald says or does something to talk to Wesweld, and it actually triggers a roll, and I take that roll and pass or fail on that roll, I have to think this entire context of the conversation with Wesweld is about this impending meeting with an enemy army. Therefore, I know I'm dealing with Daedra, Alderman Daedrin's army, DV 15 or 14, whatever. And then as Ethelwald contextually talks to Wesweld that is about this impending meeting, I can affect that difficulty up or down. Okay, so if that helps people understand what my role is, what I'm doing. But then he could talk to him about something else, about his family, whatever, and those things might actually make him feel worse, right? So I try to describe whether Wesweld's body language is positive or negative or up or down, and that should kind of cue them that they are impacting the DV, right, the difficulty value for that particular moment. Okay, and we haven't even gotten to the actual meeting with the alderman, right? This could be affecting the DV of an impending eventual combat or conversation or negotiation, right? Especially if it's in context to that event, right? If they're talking about something that they're doing, let's say Vidar is trying to build a fishing business. He's going to put all of his motivations into networking and building a fishing business, making allyships. So he would be dealing with DV values that he's ultimately dealing with for something completely unrelated to this maybe bigger problems of Dredgewater, right? But that's if they choose to pursue their own interests. So you've got DV values for certain situations or certain characters or NPCs that you can originate on the fly, or you can pull from the rule book based on a shop owner or something. You know, if he's trying to negotiate, Vidar for the most part's a peasant trying to negotiate with the leader of the fishermen to whatever, process the fish for the fishermen, right? He would be negotiating with those guys with a 0 prestige, and their DV value might actually be up a little higher than their value in the book because he's a peasant trying to build a business, right? So you just take all these pieces and effectively navigate variables and difficulty values. And then their challenges, pass, fail, for the most part, tweak the next segment, the next moment, the next phase, the next challenge, the eventual failure of not being able to get that business off the ground. Vidar has to change tactics, right? Okay. Brian meets the Justicar, and this is where, and this is why I'm always surprised. One of the reasons I love what we're doing, and I love this style of gaming, although it may not look different when you watch the APs, it may look like we're doing the same thing everybody does. As a presenter, Brian's conversation with the Justicar, the meeting with the Justicar, and what Brian revealed to the Justicar literally turned his motivation up to impending imminent disaster for the county of Dredge. Brian's character shared Washburn's weaknesses, shared that they were weak, shared they were surrounded by enemies, shared that Washburn was incapacitated. And that just told the Justicar, yep, this place is ripe for the picking. Instantly it changed the whole major dilemma for the session into the Justicar is by far more dangerous. And the only way I can, and I think Brian kind of got the hint of that through the conversation, but I made sure when Brian went to visit his father that I made it clear to Brian, if you have any doubts as to the Justicar's motivations, I used his conversation with his father to make sure Brian understood this is an evil, vile, violent man, and he ain't here to do this thing nice or peaceful. And that way, Brian knew without a doubt then the Justicar was an enemy. But what it did was it changed the Chronicles, the last third of this of the fourth session, in which they're really all they've got to do really at this point. They have a couple of things. The major dilemma was to remove Falcone, get the palisade open, and remove Father Falcone from the premises, and establish the Washburns and Wesweld as the guy in charge. That was how they were going to win the Chronicles. That was how they were going to win that session. That was the major dilemma. The minor dilemma was dealing with Mort. There was something else, and dealing with it was a minor dilemma, which means it could just complicate the session, but it wasn't something they had to achieve. But the major dilemma was getting Wesweld back on the throne, or back into the palisade, and remove the evil influence of Falcone on his mother, and his father was incapacitated. And obviously try to avoid a war with his own people, try to avoid a war, with Jared, the Viking, try to avoid the war with Von Mort on the southern border. So, but the major dilemma was establishing control of the palisade, of the keep, by getting rid of Falcone. They haven't even talked to Falcone. They haven't even visited the palisade to say, what the hell are you doing? Get out of here. They hadn't even gone there yet. So there was so much other stuff that they had to prioritize before Wesweld could even approach his mother and father's home and say, let me in, right? Outside the palisade walls. Okay. And the first one was the impending meeting with the Fjord and Alderman, with his pagan Fjord there to remove Washburn's family from control. Meanwhile, Brian has learned that the king from the north has sent down the Justicar and an army to do the same. And Brian rightly recognized after our conversation that he was by far more dangerous than their own people. So Brian races back and shares with Wesweld the real problem. We have got to approach Daedrin, and we have got to win this conversation and win over him, win over the Fjord. We have got to establish Wesweld as the rightful heir and lord. And this ain't going to be easy, but we got to do this. We got to talk this kid up. So Ethelweld really talks up Wesweld. Brian empowers him. And he shares with him, this is important because we got a greater threat really in the woods. The king of the north is going to take this territory. And he's an evil. He makes Washburn's incompetence, right? There's maliciousness to that versus the incompetence of Washburn, right? Incompetent leadership can create the same tragedies and disasters in the world, and we see it every day in real life as well as hopefully in your fiction and in your mythology. But at the same time, obviously, incompetence is bad because it can create the same disasters for people. But malicious intent is evil to some degree, and clearly that he knew the Justicar was going to it was a far worse future for Dredge. They go out to meet with Daedrin. They win the meeting. Daedrin mounts up, rides home, and he gives up the Fjord and control of the Fjord as they slowly bang down the difficulty, and they win the conversation. And again, think of them winning that conversation like hit points in a battle. Instead of using hit points, their difficulty value becomes the hit point, and once they reduce that difficulty to 0, they win, or they can lose, as the difficulty can get to the point where it's a stalemate. Or Daedrin then would say, take command of his troops and order them out of the keep, and if they don't get out of the keep, we're going to lay siege. We're going to decimate you, and we're going to lay siege to your mother and father's keep. but they won. Daedrin gives up the fjord and rides off to his family home, leaves the pagan army there. Brian takes control of the pagan army. Vidar takes control of Wesweld's troops. Ethelwold escorts Wesweld back to the palisade, and they bring down Falcone, and they reestablish Wesweld as now the lord of his own people. He takes those soldiers from there, rallies them into a battle group, and then I reduced the difficulty of the eventual combat with the Justicar. I set that DV once Brian. So the DV was set at 9 for the Justicar coming into the game. But when Brian gave him every piece of data that Brian confirmed was real, yes, we had a famine. Yes, he's incompetent. Yes, we're surrounded by enemies. Those were points being added to the DV. So Brian, by the time that conversation was over, the DV had gone to a 14. That was going to be his difficulty for negotiation or for combat or battle. Okay. So Brian just kept giving a point to the difficulty value. Meanwhile, the training of Vidar successfully trained the troops. That lowered the DV to 13. Brian rallied the pagans and asked them to come rally around the Washburns. The threat is imminent. Join us and be loyal, and delivers a speech and a toast. That lowered the difficulty with a successful. I don't even think Brian needed to make her check. I think Brian, I just lowered it one for Brian. I don't know if I actually made, no, I think he did make a check. And then, of course, Wesweld, by successfully muting Falcone and his successful check, which I think was a 14, 11 plus 3 or something, and he committed a miracle, sticking his tongue to the roof of his mouth so he could not speak. And of course, I added to that narrative that Beatrice, the teenage ward of the family, from the walls yelled that he was evil and that your father had died and he hasn't told anyone, and your mother is locked up with your dead father in mourning. And that brought the gates open. It got them in. They established control of the palisade. And effectively, that would have been the end, the successful end of the Chronicles. That they had solved the major dilemma: remove Falcone and take control. The meeting, again, the meeting with the Daedrin, they won, and then taking that effectively won them the game. That effectively won them the Chronicles. They had established control of his family. He had turned away the alderman's threat to them. And I thought, now you guys, let's go ahead. I handed it over to the person. Let's narrate kind of the end of this. And Brian, and I think they were all like, whoa, dude, we got Justicar to deal with. I said, oh, well, if you want to keep playing, let's go. So at that point, I was like, okay, well, let's have this. Let's have it out. Let's meet them. So Brian sent scouts into the north to make sure they were still there and what they were up to. He failed that role. That meant I put the army in the field on the march. So if Brian had won that role, I would have said the army's there, they are camped out, but they're not in battle mode. That would have probably changed. That would have, number one, it would have changed the difficulty to easier. And Brian and they could have strategically attacked him at a lower difficulty, unawares in the forest. But Brian failed that check. That put the armies on the march, in battle mode, and prepared for war. So that set the DV based on the training, based on Brian's speech to the pagans, and then he failed the role to determine where the army would be, which would have lowered the difficulty more. So I didn't raise the difficulty, but I put the army ready for battle. So they met on the battlefield. I let the players describe their tactics. Dell described how he built a shield wall with his men, and he faced the brunt of the army of the north. And Brian described how the pagans encircled. So I'd let them narrate the entire combat, the entire battle. I would just, if they failed a roll, I would just narrate how they've lost men and how they've taken a wound. And it was close. Had they not effectively lowered that difficulty, had they not recruited John, so they ended up with 5 rolls in every round because Brian effectively coached John to be the man he's supposed to be for Lord Washburn. So they ended up with a role there. Wesweld, they had empowered, put back on the throne. He became the young lord he's supposed to be. They got a role from Wesweld. The king's army, the Wesweld took charge and sent word to the London king to say, the northern king has sent enemies. We need help. Ethelwald prayed and made a successful prayer that that army would show up in time to help. They had a third role. King's army from London showed up. Then we had Vidar's army and we had Brian's army. Ethelwald was not in combat. Ethelwald prayed to win the day. And he made a prayer, successful prayer before the day started. The weather cleared and he got the blessing of the god upon their army. And that gave them all a spirit +3 to all their checks of max of 3, because that is the spirit of Ethelwald. Ethelwald's attribute is a +3. So Ethelwald was giving that spiritual +3 to every single 5 roll per turn event. Unless they had a greater advantage, they would. So for instance, Brian had a +2 advantage. Well, you can't use +5. You can only use the highest advantage. He took the +3. Vidar had a +2 excellent weapon. But the +3 spirit that Ethelwald provided was greater, so he got to use the +3. So every combatant, all 5 rolls, got to add a 3 to the check against the DV. As they won checks, they would avoid injury, but the DV would be lowered, or the health of the Justicar's army would be lowered. So there's a DV value and then there's a health value. I can actually leave the DV value constant and have them just slowly beat down like a hit point bubble, the health. But I don't. I generally have that health as they do damage. I generally lower the DV because as the army's getting decimated, the army's getting weaker. It makes sense. It's an easier victory. So as they were struggling, Brian had taken injuries, wounds, and Vidar was wounded. These guys quite literally would have probably been killed. But success from the king's army, success from Wesweld, success from John kept them in the fight. At one point, Wesweld sees that John is in combat with the Justicar and in control of Wesweld, sends Wesweld to John's side, and together they fight the Justicar. And then they succeeded at that role. Then I gave them the choice: do any of you want to demand he surrender and ransom his life? They all agreed that would be the thing to do. And so Wesweld, I believe Sam playing Wesweld demanded he give up, lay down his sword, command his troops to give up, and they would take him ransom. And they won. They won the day. They won the Chronicles. They saved Dredgewater. They saved the county of Dredge. They saved the Washburn legacy as lords of this country. They took the Justicar ransom, and they sent the armies back with the king's men to London as payment for coming to their aid. But they kept the Justicar that they're going to ransom to the king of the north because they need money. I mean, the Dredge is a very poor county. And that's how we ended it. This morning, I gave him a quick epilogue that the Witten would have been convened, and Wesweld at 17 would have been unanimously agreed upon to be the man in charge, especially after winning the day on the battlefield against the Justicar and the Northern Army. So the epilogue, Witten convenes, and they confirm that the Lord Wesweld Washburn would be, is the rightful steward of the kingdom, so of the county. Father Falcone was sent to London, back to the church for his part in the deal and punishment. They learned that Falcone was then sent to Northern Ireland, or Ireland in our world, to a monastery to the farthest point of Northern Ireland, effectively removing him from the known world and ending his dangerous ambition. So Falcone's been punished by being exiled to the north of Ireland in a monastery on the coast, removing him from civilization for the most part, in a very dangerous world, so to speak. And then, of course, I told them that Wesweld would have created a long-term pact with the Northern King by marrying the king's daughter. So Wesweld has married the North King, Osbert's daughter, and therefore ending the threat of the North trying to invade the county again. Brian, of course, goes on to raise his family's hounds and live on his family's I didn't write this. Brian said this last night. He would retire to take up the family business, raising the wolfhounds that they're famous for. living a simple life as a pagan, by the way. Vidar becomes Wesweld's man-at-arms. John had left the duties, and John Wesweld ultimately went to Vidar, and he gave Vidar to the standard, and he said, "You're my right-hand man. You're going to bear the standard in the field. You are my man-at-arms." And Vidar becomes the man-at-arms for the young 17-year-old lord, a leader of his armies, his personal guard, his armies. And Ethelwald is given a glebe, which in the Dark Ages, glebe is land provided by the Lord to a man of God, a man of church, in which they own that land, and they can build a church and have a, so Ethelwald is asked to stay and be the leader of the church in Dredge County, and he is given a glebe of land. Ethelwald accepts. And that is how the Chronicles end. And everybody survived, although Brian was with, I think, 1 or 2 of being killed. Vidar was in, I think, within 2 rounds of being killed. Ethelwald suffered battered and bruising from his own people during the course of adventures, but was never on death's door. He was injured in this session in the battle with the between Dar and Vidar. He stuck his head in again, trying to break those 2 up, and got injured, which meant next was dying and then dead. So very dangerous when the ogre showed up. If Ethelwald had been hit during that combat, he would have been dying, and then eventually the next phase is killed outright. So Ethelwald started that session in bad shape, and you can't heal injury quickly. It takes time and or special circumstances, which unfortunately Vidar failed trying to nurse him. Failed to check to nurse him to fatigued or battered. I can't remember which. In my own rules, I can't remember if it's battered first, then fatigued, or fatigued. I can't remember. Long story short, great experience. And I was surprised. And again, as much as you design something and you write something and you play something and you share something and you know you're naive and you know this stuff's going to be amazing. Every time you roll the dice, you don't know what's going to happen. Every time the players say something or do something, you don't know what's going to happen. That's true. That's gaming. That's what makes this a game. It's what makes it a joy to play, no matter what you're doing, because you don't know. But this was the first time that I was really backpedaling. I was caught off guard by Brian's interview with the Justicar because of the nature of the start, and then the nature that Brian was so willing to confirm all of the variables that were true. He's incapacitated. Yes, he's turned on his own people. Yes, there was a famine. He just confirmed everything. And the Justicar just kept going, really, 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 thank you, thank you, thank you. And it instantly changed the nature of the session. But I wasn't going to force a 5th session on them, and I wasn't going to demand they dealt with the Justicar. And I'm proud that Brian and Dell and Sam all said, no, we're not done. We've got to deal with this Justicar. I was going to wrap it up once they secured the major dilemma. Chronicles are over. Congratulations. However, an evil Justicar looms in the woods. End of story. We don't know how that's going to go, but I'm proud of the fact they're like, no. We're going to end this bastard one way or another. We're going to end this problem. And it was great. It ended up being a piece. It ended up being this addendum to the Chronicles, or an addendum to the session that I had no idea was going to be. And it put me in a backpedal. Oh my God, how am I going to kind of deal with this? Are they going to deal with this? And then it put me in a backpedal that, I knew that that DV had gone up to 14 through the conversation with Brian. And I thought, oh my God, I mean, what am I, do I say that we need to have a session 5 in which you got to deal with this threat? No, I mean, I didn't want to do that. So it worked out. And we ended up playing, I think, 3 hours. I think we played a total of 4. We talked for another 30 minutes, and we played for 3.5, talked for an hour. I can't remember exactly afterwards. Unbelievable. It's been a great experience to present my game in a Chronicle fashion to these 3 fantastic people and players. Again, I'm hoping someone will volunteer to run a series of sessions for us so Dell and I can enjoy our game from the player seat. And I would like somebody else to get a feel for what this is like in a multiple session thing as a presenter, not just a one-off, right? But we'll see. Anyway, everybody out there have a wonderful weekend. And I don't know whether I'll run other sessions of Dark Age of Man in the next few months. I don't know if I'll commit to more, depends. It depends on whether there's a want. It depends on whether there's players that are interested, or whether I'll play a little bit or whatever. But for the most part, I'm enjoying my role as a player in Joth, and I'm enjoying my role as a player / GM in our rotating Simba campaigns. I would like to have another long-term campaign, but I don't know when or how I would do that. So we'll see. Right now, I'm enjoying the experience that was Dark Age of Man and the sum total. I sat down this morning to put all 4 Chronicles into a document so I can put that up on Drive-Thru-RPG so people can grab this 4 sessions as a Bleak Winter Chronicles for Dark Age of Man. However, I've got to go through and make sure there's a continuity because, of course, I adjusted every random seed generator based on the games we had played. I adjusted the setups and the major minor incidents based on what the players had done in the previous session. So I need to create 4 distinct sessions that are in and of themselves playable, not dependent on what I had to create to keep our Chronicles coherent. So if that makes sense, I have to redo the RSG, I have to redo the setups because Ethelwald won't exist in your world, and the effects of Brian and Vidar upon my session 3 and my session 4 setups wouldn't be in the consumer's purchase of this or acquisition of this PDF module. So I need to make sure that is all cogent and coherent and doesn't involve information that comes directly from our experience. So I've got to tighten that up. But I will make this a Bleak Winter Chronicles 4-session Chronicles available for download from Drive-Thru-RPG for those that would like to have another. I did Glenfort Chronicles are written and available. And of course, I will put this in the same type of format so people can grab these and run 4 distinct sessions as a Chronicle, a Bleak Winter, right? Anyway, thanks for watching. A long video here, I know, but I appreciate those who are tuning in and care and are interested in this. Again, it works. What I'm finding out, and it's changed how I GM, and I can see it. I can see it in how I GM everything now. I don't do voices anymore. I don't try to get into this character and be an entertainer as a GM. I am very much more matter of fact as a GM. I like to try to communicate thoroughly. I've always tried to do that. I'm less interested now in giving away secrets, but I communicate. I want to make sure there's, and I think I'm less inclined to over describe everything. I don't know if that's maturity or if it's just the nature of how I'm more relaxed and how I enjoy gaming now as a GM and a presenter. I've evolved. I don't know if it's the experience of what I've been doing, writing this and playtesting this, or if it would have been a natural occurrence for me as someone who's not interested in entertaining the players anymore, as opposed to administering the game, providing an atmosphere and engaging them, but leaving much to the players' imaginations. And I'm more happy doing it that way, and I am certainly more relaxed. And it's more who I am. It's more matter of fact. It's more, I won't say formal, but it's I am certainly less engaged in the taking on the goblin and speaking in the goblins, less interested in that type of delivery, so to speak. And I think that's a number of things that have changed: maturity, recognizing what my role really should be, and allowing the players to imagine certain. You give them enough. I've said it before. I'm a huge fan of Hemingway, Ernest Hemingway. Big fan of Ernest Hemingway. And I've attempted to become more Hemingway-esque in my GM delivery. Try to be concise, try to deliver all the pertinent information, but not overly descriptive, not flowery, and not taking on a persona. Leave the players room to engage their imagination. And for good or ill, that is who I am, and that's how I'm going about this. I can honestly say I've changed as a GM. I've changed my perspective. I have evolved my actual techniques. I have changed the way I want to deliver an experience, for good or ill. And I'm happy with that. So everybody, have a great day.